My name is Maya Sharma. I'm 34, and for the last 7 years I've been quietly building a health tech startup from my apartment, then a tiny shared office, then a slightly less tiny office. No headlines, no applause, and definitely no pep. Talks from the family who always seemed to be holding a collective breath, wondering when I'd get a real job. Tonight, though? Tonight was different. I was at my brother Ben's engagement party in Santa Barbara, another one of those glittering, wine-drenched evenings designed to celebrate his latest triumph. The Sharmas have always been, well, polished, proper, predictably impressive. Ben's a neurologist. My parents? Stanford alumni, resume glittering with elite boardrooms and Ivy League accolades. And me? I was the glitch in the family portrait, the outlier. The daughter they'd offer a polite, distant smile to before changing the subject. That was until Ben's fiancée, Chloe Park, a sharp woman with an even sharper mind, looked across the long, candle-lit oak table. Her eyes, which had been scanning the guests, narrowed slightly on me. "Wait," she said, her voice cutting through the low hum of conversation. "Sharma? Are you Maya Sharma?" She paused, a fork loaded with something delicate hovering mid-air. "As in, the founder of Nova Path?" You could have heard a pin drop. Utensils clinked against china as they were hastily set down. A hush, sudden and absolute, swept over the table. My mother's perfectly sculpted eyebrow arched. My father's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Ben just looked baffled. I simply smiled. This wasn't about revenge. Not really. It was about a recognition that was long overdue. But honestly, it felt almost irrelevant to the quiet, relentless work I'd already poured my soul into. Growing up a Sharma meant any deviation from their gilded path was basically failure. Success was a straight, non-stop express train. Medicine, law, finance. My father, Raj Sharma, ran one of the biggest medical ethics firms in California. My mother, Priya, was a biotech executive so powerful she could dismantle a hostile boardroom, with a well-placed question and a raised eyebrow. And Ben? He walked the path they'd practically paved in gold for him, one perfectly placed achievement after another. Family dinners were less about connection and more like showcases for Ben. His research grants, his flawless GPA, his latest published paper. Then came the inevitable, polite turn in my direction. "And you, Maya?" I built a prototype that could triage ER intake in under 2 minutes, I'd say, trying to sound more confident than I felt. Mom would take a slow sip of her Chardonnay, humming thoughtfully. "That's interesting, dear. But have you considered regulatory law? It's very stable." What they called realistic, I called suffocating. What they admired, I found myself wanting to escape. I craved freedom, not formulas. Vision, not their specific brand of validation. When I was 16, I developed a triage interface for a local clinic's fundraiser. The event coordinator pulled my mom aside, telling her I was gifted. Mom smiled that tight, polite smile and replied, "Yes, well, we're hoping she'll grow into something steady." Like administration. Steady. The word still makes me cringe. As if any ambition that didn't fit their pre-approved blueprint was inherently fragile, something to be gently dismissed before it shattered. I remember once, I slipped a printout of an early algorithm I'd designed under my father's Wall Street Journal. I'd hoped he'd at least glance at it, maybe ask a question. He didn't. He just nudged it aside with his thumb to reach for his espresso. That quiet dismissal, that utter lack of curiosity, stung more than if he'd laughed in my face. When Ben got accepted into medical school, they threw a massive catered celebration. The same week, I'd qualified for the California State Tech Expo Finals. My mother's response: "Oh, that's nice, Maya. But maybe next time. Everything's already arranged for Ben's announcement, you understand." I went to the expo alone, and I won. I came home clutching a surprisingly heavy trophy, my hands still buzzing. No one asked how it went. They were too busy popping champagne and addressing invitations for Ben's Johns Hopkins send-off party. I placed the trophy in the back of my closet. It wasn't just a symbol of victory. It was a quiet testament to who I was, even if they couldn't or wouldn't see it. That night, curled up in my room, I made a silent vow. I would stop chasing their approval. I'd build a life, a career, so undeniably solid, so visible, that it wouldn't need their validation to be real. College was my first taste of actual freedom. I chose a lesser-known but intensely focused coding institute in Oregon, far from Santa Barbara, even farther from the weighty expectations of the Sharma name. There, I wasn't Ben's little sister. I was Maya, the girl who could make data sing and turn tangled systems into elegant solutions. In my sophomore year, I met Zara Ali. Zara was a force of nature, brilliant, restless, and always questioning the status quo. We bonded instantly, two women with chips on our shoulders and a shared fire in our bellies. Our nights were fueled by lukewarm takeout, borrowed routers, and the relentless debugging of code in her cluttered off-campus garage. We weren't just building for grades. We were building because we had to. NovaPath began as a sketch on a scrap of graph paper. An encrypted, intuitive interface designed to fix the critical communication gaps plaguing hospitals. Zara's uncle had died from a preventable prescription mix-up. My own grandmother had been misdiagnosed 3 times in a single, terrifying year. We didn't just believe the system was broken, we'd lived the consequences. While our peers were polishing their resumes for career fairs, Zara and I were filing for an LLC, using prize money from a regional pitch contest. Her family cheered us on every step of the way. Mine? They still vaguely assumed I was doing some sort of IT temp work. I let them. It hurt less than trying to explain a dream they couldn't or wouldn't begin to comprehend. I still remember the month we couldn't make rent on our tiny apartment in the high South Loop. Instead of panicking, Zara, ever the pragmatist, suggested we build our landlord a new website in exchange for a 1-month extension. He agreed, looking more amused than convinced, but it bought us time. Time to code, time to refine, time to dream. Bit by bit, NovaPath started to breathe. We pitched to small angel investors in makeshift conference rooms, armed with more passion than Polish. We brought on Elias Chen, a back-end wizard who'd casually dropped out of Caltech because he was bored. Then came our first deal, a mid-size regional health network in Indiana, then another, and another. Each new win felt surreal, a quiet miracle. We were actually building something real, something that saved precious time, prevented errors, made patient care smoother. But I never told my family. Not when we passed 100,000 users. Not even when we secured $3.2 million in our Series A funding round. They never asked. By then, Ben was chief resident at UCLA. My parents' annual Christmas newsletter still referred to me as Maya, who's exploring freelance tech work in Chicago. I let it stand. It wasn't out of bitterness, not entirely. It was more about protection. What Zara and I were building felt too important, too sacred, to expose to people who had once casually labeled my ambitions a distraction. But success, I learned, doesn't need a spotlight to make noise. It hums. It expands. By the time I turned 30, NovaPath was valued at over $85 million. We had contracts with 130 hospitals, a full staff, actual HR, and a waiting list that stretched well into the next fiscal year. We'd already declined 3 acquisition offers. We weren't done building. Then, one morning, an email landed in my inbox. The sender's name made my breath catch. Chloe Park, Director of Strategic Partnerships at Horizon Health Systems. She wanted to schedule a meeting to explore a potential mission alignment. I read it twice. Then I did a quick, slightly shaky search. Chloe Park, Ben's fiancée. I told no one. Not Zara, not our advisors, not even my closest friends. For a week, I just sat with it. The woman marrying my brother was spearheading an effort to potentially acquire the company I'd painstakingly, secretly built from nothing. She hadn't made the connection yet, of course. I'd always deliberately stayed off the radar. No press photos, no industry panels, just a first name and a few carefully worded blurbs in trade journals. But the engagement dinner was looming. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that it was only a matter of time before the carefully constructed walls came down. If you've ever poured your heart into something, stayed quiet, while you built it, determined to let the results speak louder than any background noise, then you know what I was feeling. Stick around, because you won't want to miss what happened when Chloe Park finally connected the dots. A few days before the engagement party, my mother called. Chloe's family is very accomplished, Maya. We want to present a united, polished front. Translation: don't embarrass us with your usual, practical wardrobe. Of course, I replied, a small smile playing on my lips. I'll wear something elegant. I chose a black dress, sleek, minimal, structured. Not flashy, not trying too hard, but not submissive either. Just quietly powerful. It wasn't about impressing them anymore. I didn't need armor. I was the armor. The restaurant, Riverton-on-Lake, was a gleaming tower of glass and steel. The newest Michelin-starred darling in downtown Chicago, perched dramatically over the water. I arrived precisely on time, not early enough to fuss over name cards, not late enough to make an entrance. Just present. Ben greeted me with his usual, easygoing warmth. Maya, glad you made it. He gestured towards a tall, poised woman at his side. This is Chloe. She extended a perfectly manicured hand. Her smile was graceful, her gaze direct and intelligent. Exactly the kind of woman my mother had always hoped I'd magically transform into. Articulate, stylish, visibly accomplished. Congratulations, I said warmly, shaking her hand. She smiled back, completely unaware. For now, I thought. Dinner began with the clinking of champagne flutes and a round of carefully scripted compliments. My father's toast was a lengthy ode to Ben's latest publication on cognitive neurology. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a lace-edged handkerchief while reminiscing about Ben's first science fair project. A baking soda volcano, if I recalled correctly. No one mentioned me, which was par for the course. I was seated next to a distant cousin Liam, who leaned over conspiratorially. So, Maya, still bouncing between gigs? I'm in health tech, I answered, keeping my tone light. Oh, he said, tilting his head. Like an app or something? Something like that. Between courses, an uncle, Marcus, chimed in from across the table. Ben mentioned you might be getting an interview with Apple. Entry level, he said, but still solid. Good for you. I offered a non-committal smile. That won't be necessary. Uncle Marcus. It was then that I caught Chloe Park watching me, really studying me, like someone rapidly flipping through mental files, trying to place a familiar face. Her brow furrowed slightly. She tilted her head. Maya Sharma, she said, her voice thoughtful, but carrying clearly across the table. Wait. Sharma. Her eyes widened almost imperceptibly. Ben laughed. Yeah, she's my sister, the elusive one. Chloe slowly set her fork down. The clink echoed in the sudden quiet. You're Maya Sharma? From Novapath? The air around our section of the table seemed to crystallize. Forks paused mid-journey. Even the impeccably trained waitstaff seemed to stall mid-step. I am, I replied calmly. You're the founder of Novapath? My mother's expression faltered, her perfectly applied smile freezing in place. My father stopped mid-sip of his wine, his hand hovering. Chloe turned to Ben, her voice laced with a disbelief that was quickly morphing into something else. You never told me your sister built NovaPath? She looked back at me, her eyes wide. The company we're potentially looking to acquire? Ben blinked, looking utterly lost. I'm sorry, what? Maya? No, that's... You must be confused, Chloe. My sister, she works in, tech support or something freelance. No, Chloe interrupted, her voice clear and firm, cutting through Ben's flustered denial. Your sister is the co-founder and CEO of arguably the most advanced healthcare communications platform on the market. We've been in discussions with her company for the past 6 weeks. The current valuation is north of $200 million. The silence that followed was absolute, heavy enough to press down on my shoulders. One by one, heads swiveled towards me. My mother's hand fluttered to her pearl necklace, as if seeking an anchor in a suddenly turbulent sea. My father's confident posture seemed to sag, just slightly, as if he were seeing me, truly seeing me, for the very first time, and had no idea what to make of it. Ben just stared, his mouth slightly agape. Is that true, Maya? He whispered, his voice barely audible. Yes, I said, my voice even, my gaze steady. Zara Ali and I started NovaPath in a garage. We now serve over 300 hospitals nationwide. No one spoke. Not even Chloe, who was now looking at me with a complex, unreadable mix of apology, admiration, and perhaps a dawning understanding. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur of fragmented conversations. Aunt Sarah suddenly wanted to know if I had any stock tips. Cousin Liam, who once openly mocked my little computer projects, leaned in with a newfound curiosity and an entirely unconvincing warmth. My mother, who had relentlessly pushed me towards law school, mentioned no less than 3 times that she always knew I had a distinct flair for innovation. My father vaguely claimed he'd told several colleagues about my interesting tech project years ago. I let them say whatever they needed to say. I didn't argue. I didn't elaborate. I didn't need to. Ben, though, he stayed quiet. The shock hadn't worn off. He reached for his wine glass, missed it slightly, and just sat there, his hand resting flat on the crisp linen tablecloth, as though he'd momentarily forgotten how to move. After dessert, as guests began to mingle, Chloe approached me near the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the glittering city. I'm so sorry, she said quietly, her eyes sincere. I didn't mean to out you like that. I shook my head. You didn't. That moment, or one like it, was always going to come. Well, she added, a small, genuine smile touching her lips. For what it's worth, you've built something truly incredible. Something that's saving lives. Our team talks about NovaPath constantly. Now I understand why they're so fiercely protective of its integrity. You've built more than just a product. You've built trust. I nodded. Thank you, Chloe. And I meant it. That night, I walked to my car without looking back. They finally saw me. But the truth was, I had become everything I needed to be long before they finally noticed. The messages started arriving before I even got home. We need to talk. Brunch tomorrow, 11 a.m. at the Waldron Hotel. That was my mother. Direct, efficient, already planning the damage control. Or perhaps the recalibration. My father's text came 2 minutes later. Proud of you, Maya. Let's catch up properly. Ben's text didn't arrive until nearly midnight. It was brief, almost stark. Why didn't you tell me? I stared at that last one for the longest time. Why hadn't I told them? Because deep down, I hadn't wanted to need their recognition anymore. Because I wasn't sure which would hurt more. Being dismissed all over again, or finally being acknowledged, but only after I'd already dragged myself across the finish line, alone. Still, I agreed to brunch. Some things, it seemed, needed to be said out loud. They were already seated when I arrived at the Waldron's airy, sun-drenched restaurant in River North. My mother wore pearls and a crisp silk blouse that probably cost more than my first server. My father had on his most formal weekend sport coat. They looked less like my parents and more like two senior partners attending a high-stakes board meeting, as if my sudden, visible success required an immediate shift in their decorum. "Maya," my father said, rising somewhat awkwardly from the table. He gave me a stiff, unfamiliar half-hug. "You look, well." My mother's eyes scanned me, a little too intently, like an auditor reviewing an unexpected financial report. "Yes, very well." She didn't wait for pleasantries. "I've been reading everything I could find this morning. The awards, the funding, rounds, your company's growth trajectory. It's all remarkably impressive." She paused, her gaze unwavering. "But why, Maya? Why didn't you share any of this with us?" I carefully folded the linen napkin on my lap. "Because the last time I tried to share a significant achievement with you, Mom, you suggested I apply for a front desk job at a legal firm." "That's not fair, Maya," my father interjected, a defensive edge to his voice. "We were just trying to guide you, to help you find something secure." "No," I replied, my voice even, devoid of accusation. "You were trying to fix something that, in your eyes, was broken. Something that didn't align with your definition of success." My mother's carefully constructed composure faltered, just for a second. We didn't understand the tech space back then. It all felt so risky, so unstable. "And medicine doesn't carry risks?" I asked gently. "Law doesn't have its instabilities?" "That's different," she insisted. "Those are structured, established paths." I nodded slowly. "Exactly. And that's what scared you. I chose something you couldn't predict, couldn't map out, couldn't control." My father let out a slow breath. "But you're clearly brilliant, Maya. We always knew you were capable." "No," I said, my voice soft but steady. "You knew what you wanted me to be. That's not the same thing as knowing me." The waiter arrived with a silver pot of coffee, offering a momentary, welcome interruption. I stirred cream into my cup, collecting my thoughts. "I spent years," I began again, "pouring every ounce of myself into building something I loved, something I believed in. And every single time I tried to share even a small piece of that journey with you, it felt like shouting into a hurricane. Eventually, I just stopped shouting." "We thought you were lost," my mother whispered, her voice barely audible above the clatter of distant cutlery. "I wasn't lost," I said, meeting her gaze. "I just wasn't yours to direct anymore." The silence that followed was thin, almost fragile, like spun glass. But it held. "We do love you, Maya," she said, her voice softer now. "I know you do," I replied. "But love without respect, without acceptance of who I actually am, doesn't always feel like love. Sometimes it feels like a prerequisite for it." For a fleeting moment, my father looked genuinely unsure, like a man who had built his entire life on the unshakable foundation of being right, and was suddenly, profoundly wondering if somewhere, along the meticulously planned route, he'd gotten something terribly wrong. The rest of brunch passed more gently, less posturing, more actual listening. They asked real questions, about Zara, about the drafty garage in Oregon where Novapath was born, about our first nerve-wracking pitch to that regional hospital in Indiana. My mother even admitted she'd tried to read an article on startup culture, but couldn't understand half the acronyms. It was the most unguarded, most genuinely curious I'd seen her in years. "We never meant to make you feel small or dismissed," my father said softly as the waiter discreetly placed the check on the table. "You didn't mean to," I replied, offering a small, tired smile. But you did, and I had to learn how to grow around that to build my own foundation. He nodded slowly, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. I'm glad you did. Even if it wasn't with us cheering you on from the start. When we left the Waldron, there were no dramatic, movie-worthy hugs. No sudden, tearful reconciliation. Just a quiet, slightly awkward plan to meet again for dinner the following week. It wasn't everything, but it was something. A beginning, perhaps. A few days later, Ben showed up at my apartment. He was holding a bottle of good Cabernet in one hand and a slightly squashed bakery box in the other. I tried baking an apology cake, he said sheepishly, a faint dusting of flour still visible on his sleeve. It went badly. These are Plan B. He held up the box of professionally made pastries. I laughed. A genuine, easy laugh. Classic Ben. We sat on the floor of my living room, our backs against the couch, the glittering Chicago skyline spread out before us through the wide windows. I need to say this, he began, turning towards me, his usual confident demeanor softened by an unfamiliar vulnerability. I'm sorry, Maya. Truly sorry. I looked at him, surprised by the directness. I genuinely thought you were... No floundering, he continued, his gaze fixed on the wine swirling in his glass. I bought into their version of success, their narrative about you. I never even bothered to really ask you, what you were doing, what you were passionate about. I just assumed. You weren't the only one, I said quietly. Maybe not, he conceded. But I'm the only one sitting here right now, and I should have known better. I should have seen you. He raised his glass. To the black sheep. I raised mine, a ghost of a smile playing on my lips. To the sheep that quietly built an empire. 6 months later, the Horizon Health Systems, deal closed. NovaPath became a pivotal part of a global tech portfolio. Zara, brilliant as ever, stepped into a global strategy role. I took on the position of head of innovation for the newly expanded division. My office overlooked the Chicago River, a constant flowing reminder of how far I'd come. But that wasn't the real change. The real change was my mother, now regularly texting me articles about women in tech, sometimes with confused questions, sometimes with genuine admiration. It was my father, awkwardly but earnestly, attending NovaPath product demos and trying to understand the intricacies of our latest updates. It was Ben, quoting my work on data-driven healthcare solutions during his grand rounds at the hospital. The biggest change, though? It was me, mentoring a group of bright, ambitious girls in a local STEM program, telling them, with a conviction born of experience, you don't need anyone's permission to matter. You don't need their applause to validate your dreams. Build anyway. Believe in yourself first. Because recognition, that fades. Applause, that dies down. But conviction, that quiet, unwavering belief in yourself and your vision, that stays. That's the foundation upon which you build a life that's truly your own. If you've ever felt overlooked, underestimated, or told your dreams were too big, too impractical, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell me your story, your journey, or simply your thoughts. Your voice matters. And if my story resonated with you, maybe stick around. Let's keep building a space where quiet strength isn't just acknowledged, it's celebrated.